Chernihiv is a fascinating city. We're going to return to it. It might have been on one of your maps. The reason it was on one of your maps is that it's an old city, right? It's 500 years or so older than Moscow. It's been there for a very long time. It's ancient. And it is an ancient center also of scholarship, of theology and of scholarship. Along with Kyiv, it was one of the two great centers of religious and intellectual in general disputation in what's now Ukraine. And the reason why, and one reason why I have Chernihiv in mind is that this whole story, the story about the Kyiv and the Moscow and how it's all one place, that was actually invented by a guy in Chernihiv. It was invented by one person. Like we all believe it, like it has this incredible effect on, and the reason he invented it had everything to do with geography. Oh, I forgot to put his name on the sheet. Okay, so. So in the Cossack Wars of the 17th century, which don't worry, we'll get to. In the Cossack Wars of the 17th century, at the end of it, there's basically a stalemate between Poland, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Moscow. And this stalemate is codified in the Treaty of Andrusovo in 1667. And according to that treaty, the territory on the east of the Dnipro was going to be Russia, and west of the Dnipro was going to be Poland. It was a little unclear what that meant for Kyiv, because Kyiv was on both sides, but eventually Kyiv ended up being being under control of Moscow. So, and that meant Chernihiv was as well. So Kyiv and Chernihiv, which are these major centers of European scholarship and thought, are now suddenly under the control of Moscow, which has no centers of scholarship and thought. No, that's just a statement of fact. I mean, there aren't any universities, there aren't any academies in Moscow at that time. So so Lazar Baranovich was a very intelligent guy, one of the great theologians of his time, and used to enjoying a certain amount of personal influence, it should be said. And when Chernihiv and Kyiv fall under Moscow, he makes a play. And see if you could think of a play which is as good as this play. He says to the fellow Orthodox clergy in Moscow, he says, you know what? We're actually all one country. And the history of your country, that one in Moscow, it actually begins in Kyiv. And this was news to the people in Moscow. This had not occurred to them. This was not their story of themselves at the time. But Baranovich said, your history actually starts with Kyiv. And of course, why does he say that? Because that makes Kyiv really important, right? Because so suddenly, Ukraine and Kyiv and Chernihiv are not just places that got conquered by Moscow. It turns out they're the beginning of the history of Moscow. And that dignifies him, and it dignifies his collegium, his school. It dignifies Chernihiv, it dignifies Kyiv, right? That seems like a pretty good play. And it worked. For a while, it worked. But then imagine what happens next, right? What happens next is that eventually the Russian clerics take over the story on their own, and they say, yes, okay, that's true, but after a couple generations, they pick up all the tricks that the Ukrainians used to argue. They learn the languages too. They start reading the Western religious literature themselves. They learn about theology and disputation. And so they take the argument and they make it their own. And then by the 18th century, it becomes a secular argument, no longer a religious argument, but a secular argument. When the Russian Empire is formed in 1721, it's called the Russian Empire for this reason, right? And then when Russia invents a secular history of itself in the 19th century, it's this story, right? But this story happened because of this guy, who, if he drowned under his horse, or as people tended to do at the time, right? If something had happened to him on the way to writing that letter, maybe that story would never have arisen, right? And then maybe we would all analyze this war a little bit better than we did. And so again, I'm just trying to make the point that where a certain person is at a certain time and place may matter actually a lot. Like you couldn't actually trade Lazar Baranovich off for anybody else. He wasn't interchangeable. And those circumstances, that Chernihiv fell under Russia at that particular time were very specific.